When those results are announced, I have a good feeling we're going to be doing very, very well here in Iowa.
We know by the time it's all said and done, Iowa, you have shocked the nation.
The app that was intended to relay caucus results to the party failed.
The phone backup system that they had in place, according to one source, is a disaster.
We are one step closer to defeating the most corrupt president in American history.
From our indication, it's going to be close.
Welcome to The Real News. I'm Mark Steiner. Good to have you with us. Well, we don't know, they don't know, nobody knows who won. But just what are the takeaways from this disaster of the Iowa caucuses? No matter who's eventually declared the winner, I mean, we don't know. Many would argue that the caucus system itself is antiquated and discriminatory and needs to be done away with, and that Iowa need not be, after 48 years, the first primary state. Then there's a question of the app use that no one was trained to use and was developed by a group called Shadow Inc. that was funded by a group called Acronym, created by Clinton and Obama operatives. This has unleashed the worst nightmares of some of the conspiracy theorists in America. Then there's the ever larger question of the disarray exhibited by the Democrats, not just in Iowa and because of the Iowa meltdown, but in general. Their own civil war could breed electoral disaster for them. We're making too much of that? We'll talk to two folks who may know. Akilah Lacey is a politics reporter. She was previously the Intercept's inaugural Addie Barkin reporting fellow. Prior to that, she was a politics fellow in the DC Bureau. She's worked at Politico covering breaking news and immigration. And we're also joined by Rebecca Zweig, who is a visiting assistant professor at the University of Iowa. She's a recent graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop and lives in Iowa City and a contributor to The Nation magazine. And Akilah and Rebecca, welcome. Good to have you both with us.
Great to be here.
So let's begin. Nobody will know, even by the time this airs today, nobody's going to know who won. Maybe half the votes will be in. But Akilah, let me just start with you and just talk a bit about this app that was used. That seems to, I was thinking about this earlier. 20 years ago, when we were covering the election of the year 2000, we had hanging chads. And now I think we have hanging apps. So what do we make of this?
There's a lot of, conspiracies flying around on Twitter right now about what happened with this app. But according to the state party, they're saying that there were inconsistencies with reporting times. And so, and a lot of people reported that they were having issues just connecting to the app and submitting their reports. So they are now verifying all the results via paper trails. There's been some reporting about the firm that invested in the app and the fact that it's an ad agency that was launched in the wake of the 2016 election to try to kind of be the Democratic response to Republicans who have primarily dominated that ad space. But yeah, I don't really know if there's a lot there. There's, people were kind of lobbing questions about whether it was a security hack. The party, said that wasn't the issue at all, and that it was more of a technical failure, which I don't know which is worse, honestly.
I mean, because you have, this is the company that Gerald Nimera, I think I'm saying his name right, Nimera, who was part of the Hillary's campaign for president, is the head of Shadow, and he was chief tech officer and operating officer for Acronym, which funded all of this. And David Plouffe was one of the Obama's people, joined the board of directors. I mean, so I'm just curious what the different people are saying about what this might be. I'm not saying, and I am not one of those conspiracy theorists who thinks, oh, they did this to get Bernie, though some people think that. But it really was a disaster. I mean, from what I've read, and you've been in Iowa, Rebecca. I mean, what I've read, there's nobody was trained in how to use this app. People were befuddled about how to get it started. What do we know?
Right, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's a shame because the actual caucus training, from what I've seen from precinct captains this year, went really well. There was, a sufficient amount of training in basically everything except for this reporting app, which was introduced in January. And I do know that there were several, firms, including the Open Source Election Technology Institute, that was warning the IDP against using this app. Yeah, they didn't seem to, give sort of any sufficient training for their, thousands of precinct captains.
Yeah, and Akila, you've been writing about this as well. I mean, it just seems to me that it's shocking the Democrats are so far behind, it seems, in the use of digital technology compared to some of the Republican operatives. What do you think's at work here?
I don't really know, honestly. I could speculate, but it just seems like kind of a lack of preparation on the part of the party. They're saying that these are kind of like, normal things that happen. But, if Rebecca, I haven't talked to precinct captains on the ground there, but if you're saying that you hear that the trainings went well, it's confusing as to why there would be so many problems. I did hear that several of the campaigns had raised these questions earlier in the day, so it wasn't like everything started to break down right when the results were supposed to be coming in. There had been back and forths on this all day. If I'm remembering correctly, and I believe that the Sanders campaign had been working on a separate backup app in case something like this happened. So there were fears about this, but I guess there wasn't enough quality control until they started just telling everyone that they were waiting for quality control for the results. Yeah.
I mean, from what I understand, the caucus, go ahead, Rebecca. The caucus training, from what I understand, went well, but they didn't teach anyone how to use the app. That's what I heard from some people.
Right, and they have had, for many years, a Colin system that's worked, relatively well. But the app was implemented, ironically, for speed, to get results in quicker, and now we know that that's not the case. So
and even the Colin system didn't work. People were talking about the reports I've heard all morning and been reading and listening on public media and reading papers that people had to wait online for an hour and a half, 2 hours, 3 hours to have their phone calls answered so they can give in their results, and then they have to send in as well a picture of the results. So it was really was done back-asswards. It's like a smudge on Iowa and on the Democratic Party, it seems to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know exactly why the Colin system was so faulty this time, but yeah, they were using it as a backup system. It seemed to have failed. They seem to have dropped the ball on that as well.
So this has called into question, Akila, as well about the issues of whether Iowa should be the first state. Let's talk a bit about that together for a moment. This whole question of whether the caucus system is this antiquated, doesn't work. People are going to start calling for the end of it. And let me get both your perspectives. I know you've been writing about this, Rebecca. Let me start with Akila and go right to Rebecca.
Yeah, so people were talking about this obviously in the days, and they've been talking about Iowa for years, but it was a bigger conversation. I remember, I believe Democracy Now! Specifically asked Elizabeth Warren about this, and there was a big, uproar about her kind of refusal to say that Iowa shouldn't be the first state and to acknowledge that it is kind of emblematic of a system that centers and has historically centered white voters at the expense of voters of non-white voters. So I think yesterday, a lot of people were joking, like we came into the day kind of talking about why Iowa shouldn't be this way. And now we kind of got what we asked for. But the party here is to blame. It's not the fault of the voters in Iowa. And so I think we shouldn't conflate those 2 points.
Absolutely. If there has been sort of this recycled, criticism of the Iowa caucus, basically you can go back to, or at least from what I saw, 1984. They already sort of were, like the New York Times had something that was like, in 1988, Iowa shouldn't be the caucus state. So this is an argument that has been recycled literally every caucus season. What's interesting is that, the reforms that have basically made the Iowa caucus or structured the party structure of the caucus currently came from reforms after the 1968 caucus was such a disaster and so unrepresentative and so sort of undemocratic. And now it seems like those issues are again sort of coming to a head. one of my sources on the ground, who's sort of a veteran Democratic, activist in the state, has been a precinct captain for decades at this point, told me, the caucuses as they are now sort of started by accident and they'll probably end by accident. And it sort of seems like this might be the accident that actually pushes it over the edge.
Yeah, I mean, it seems, on its face to be a very democratic system. People gather together, they argue, they debate, whoever doesn't get the most votes, they have to go somewhere else. And it seems that way, but the reality is, as you were, I think, alluding to, Rebecca, if you are disabled, if you have to work at night, if you can't afford to get over there, don't have a car, you can't participate. So it really does narrow the field of people who can make the selection in Iowa itself. I mean, that's part of the problem.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that it is sort of almost an exaggeration of, some of the problems that the electoral system in America has as a whole, right? It's election day isn't a national holiday, right? There are many people that can't access voting for either material reasons or, it is somehow like culturally inaccessible. And I think that Iowa definitely puts like a fisheye lens because of the system onto that.
And so going back to what Keller for a moment, the other part that always interests me here is you have Iowa, and we're going to talk about, and before we get into something else, we have New Hampshire, both really, really white states that seem to have the lock on who gets the boost in the beginning. That seems to me to be also a little antiquated given who we are as a nation.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's been a central and one of the most valid critiques of it. And it all comes down to the point that Rebecca just made, that this is a system that is super arbitrary. There's no reason that Iowa's first. It just is, and then it became first, and it's been a strategy that other candidates have used to win, and then that gets reported, and then other candidates use it. It's a self-feeding cycle, as so much of politics is. But I think something else that's interesting about what happened with the caucuses last night that I wanted to point out is, along with this kind of folkloric image around Iowa as the heart of the nation and the pinnacle of the democratic system, and aside from the issues that sideline voters who can't get out of work or are disabled, people that you already just mentioned, some of the caucuses ended last night in coin flips. The ways that people pull voters from one side to the other, there is a lot of democratic spirit in that, but it's also very, there's something kind of sinister about it. Like there's so many things that kind of end up in a gray area and then end up being, decided on whims and things like coin tosses, which is crazy. And I saw that all over last night. Obviously I wasn't there, but,
right.
And Twitter is only representative of some of the caucuses that we're reporting, but it's still interesting to look at.
The coin toss blew my mind. I mean, that was just, toss a coin and we'll see who wins. That's the way to do it. But let me talk about another issue here before we close. And let's look at this piece here. This is John Heinemann from MSNBC. He's a commentator, also a Democratic operative, or had been. And let's watch this for a moment.
There's no doubt that if Bernie Sanders is looking like he's going to run away with it, for the Democratic establishment, that's almost as scary as losing Donald. Like, beating Donald Trump is really important, almost as important as keeping Bernie Sanders from being the party's nominee.
Now, I play that because when you look what happened in Iowa just now, and the implosion that happened in Iowa, and you also kind of think about what the battle going inside the Democratic Party right now, and you watch Pete Buttigieg. Let's for a moment take a second and watch Pete Buttigieg and jump into this final segment.
Tell me about your decision last night to go out and claim victory. You went up on the stage and said, we were victorious here tonight. What did you base that on?
Well, we were looking at the internal numbers that we had and beginning to realize that something extraordinary had happened last night.
So not based, though, on anything you had heard from the state Democratic Party, for example?
No, we don't have anything from the party, at least I don't, that you wouldn't have heard as well. We saw that early trickle.
Why should any Democratic voter have any confidence whatsoever that the party can organize to defeat Donald Trump when they can't actually undertake an Iowa caucus without a massive, confusing result in the end? What confidence should any voter have after last night?
Well, I think one question is about how you put together a technical system to move out precinct numbers. Another question is the future of the American Republic. And on that question, I see a gathering majority of Americans.
So the question that this kind of begs, and I think the whole implosion of what happened in Iowa also begs, given the kind of different responses from the candidates and what happened there, is are the Democrats prepared to take on Donald Trump, who now, by this Gallup poll, has a 50% approval rating? And that could, of course, shift between now and November. But nevertheless, I mean, they're facing a intense opposition from being able to win, given the people around Donald Trump and what put him in office in the first place. So, what does this portend, do we think, for what we could see inside the Democrats, who seem to be infighting and really panicked by even the thought of a Bernie Sanders victory? Kayla, let me let you start, and we'll conclude with Rebecca.
Yeah, so I think this is not really going to do anything to help quell any of the infighting that we've been seeing kind of heat up in the past few weeks among Democrats. And the Trump campaign is definitely already using this as ammo. They released a statement last night through Brad Parscale, Trump's campaign director, calling it, I think, the sloppiest train wreck in history. And people are asking whether he's going to bring it up in the State of the Union tonight. I wouldn't be surprised if he did. So yeah, I don't think it bodes well, and it will be interesting to see what tomorrow brings as far as a statement kind of trying to paper over this and explain away what happened and reestablish the idea that there's unity, despite all of the competing statements that were coming out last night.
Because, Rebecca, you can see, I mean, there's a lot of people on the progressive side now calling for Tom Perez to resign. That's taking place. And you have people accusing the DNC of trying to block anybody who's not part of the establishment from getting any power inside, and people in the establishment worrying that Bernie Sanders will blow everything up and nobody can win. So this may not bode well for what could happen in November.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, I think, the establishment is one thing. I think it is important to sort of look at least what we've seen from the voters on the ground. I know that, several Iowa entrance polls last night, 61%, voters polled were saying that they are just looking for whoever can beat Trump, while, a third wanted a nominee that agreed with them on major issues. So I think that there is, on the voter standpoint, perhaps more unity than there is in the actual establishment. But I don't think that this bodes well for, Iowa on the national scale is all about narrative building, right? And this doesn't bode well for the narrative building that I think the party was hoping for.
Yeah, well, we'll see how this folds out. I guess by the time when people are watching us today, we may know what half of the voters think. We won't know what all the voters think maybe tomorrow morning in Iowa. And of course, everybody else is now off to New Hampshire, which we'll also be covering here on The Real News. And I just want to thank both of our guests for the work they do and for joining us. Kayla Lacey and Rebecca Zweig, thank you both so much for taking your time with The Real News today. Thank you for the work you do. I look forward to talking to you a lot in the future as this campaign unfolds.
Thanks for having us, Mark.
Great. Thank you.
And let's watch out for those hanging apps. And I'm Mark Steiner, here for The Real News Network. Take care.
Thanks a lot for watching. Appreciate it. But do us one more solemn favor. Hit the subscribe button below. You know you want to. Stay up on the videos.